that NATO is effectively fighting Russia, calling it a certainty. This comes after former Russian President and Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev warned that creating a no-fly zone over Ukraine and allowing NATO to shoot down Russian drones would directly lead to war between the alliance and Russia. Medvedev comments come in response to Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski's support for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. Medvedev has expressed his concerns, calling the proposal a provocative idea from Kyiv and NATO. Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations, is joining us live from Minneapolis on this story. What do you make of this statement issued by Dmitry Medvedev and his warning as well to the EU and NATO?
Well, it's sort of predictable at one level. Russia obviously has an interest in drawing a clear red line that the sort of proposed no-fly zone that comes out of Brussels and Washington periodically is a non-starter, and in fact it's a casus belli, that would be a cause of war. So he's signaling that very clearly. No direct NATO involvement in this war, even against the backdrop of considerable indirect NATO involvement in this war. The irony there, or perhaps it's of a piece, is in both Poland and Romania in the last few days, Russia has deployed its own drones. And these weren't accidents. These weren't accidental crossings of the NATO frontier. These were deliberate elements of either a probing attack or a diplomatic signal or a salami slice tactic. But that's qualitatively different. NATO is entitled to shoot down Russian drones if they cross into NATO airspace. The Russian red line is, do not shoot down our drones if they're operating over Ukraine. We will consider that to be an overt act of war.
Yes. Also, Andrew Latham, after these comments, do you believe there will be any shifting in strategy by European countries, or are they unlikely to change their strategy at all based on these comments and this warning? In fact, this warning came after the Polish foreign minister's statement.
Yes, I mean, there is a redeployment of forces, Operation Eastern Sentry, so more non-Polish NATO members, their troops are now being moved, more troops are being moved to Poland. Again, to signal to the Kremlin that we're not going to put up with any incursions via air or land into NATO territory. So that's something of, I would say, an operational shift, not a grand strategic shift. The grand strategy remains the same. NATO was created to contain the Soviet Union, and now it's about containing Russia. That hasn't changed, but how they're going about it has changed. And the other element of that, of course, is the threats to confiscate, if that's the right word, Russian assets in Europe. And that, of course, is fraught, too, from a European perspective. There would be reciprocal moves on the part of the Russians, confiscating European assets in Russia. But it also sends the wrong signal to the rest of the world. Why would you have assets in the European Union or denominated in the euro when the Europeans get irritated with you? They'll simply confiscate that. So I think that's an empty threat. I don't think the Europeans, in terms of your question about strategic shifts, I don't think they're going to double down on the seizure of Russian assets in Europe.
Okay.
It's just too counterproductive.
Okay, stay with us. In fact, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has issued this warning to European states, saying it would take action against any nation attempting to seize its assets. This, of course, comes amidst reports that the European Union is exploring ways to leverage hundreds of billions of dollars in frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the US and its allies imposed sanctions, blocking transactions with the Russian Central Bank and Finance Ministry. As a result, approximately $300 to $350 billion, in fact, of Russian sovereign assets, largely consisting of government bonds, have been frozen, predominantly in European, US, and British securities. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has reportedly pushed for the EU to find new ways to utilize these frozen assets, potentially to help finance Ukraine's defense against Russia. According to reports, the European Commission is also considering the possibility of using Russian cash deposits, including those from maturing bonds, at the European Central Bank to fund a reparations loan for Ukraine. So another warning being issued now by Dmitry Medvedev, this against using these foreign assets which EU is threatening to do, Andrew, at this point.
Yes, I mean, this is a multifaceted conflict, and there are various tools, not just military tools on the ground and in the air, but these diplomatic tools, but also these economic tools, weapons, I should say, tools that have been weaponized. But again, I would underscore that Ursula von der Leyen, by the way, is pretty extreme out there in terms of the European leadership class. The European people aren't really in favor of this because they're tiring of this war, especially, well, across the board. But Ursula von der Leyen really is pushing the limits here. And I just don't think it's going to happen. What the proposed shift is not just freezing Russian assets, but seizing them and then diverting them to support the Ukrainians. So taking Russian money and spending it to support Russia's enemy. Obviously, this is a weaponization of economic relations, and it's one that the Russians, signaling indirectly through former President Medvedev, are simply not going to stand for. If it happens, which I don't think it will, the Russians will retaliate. And not only will they retaliate directly, but I think they'll try to mobilize the global South by saying things like, do you really want to invest in Europe? When something you do domestically or a conflict you get involved in will trigger them and they will confiscate your assets and maybe redeploy them to support your enemies. I mean, this is very counterproductive. The United States isn't doing this in a very direct way because it would feed the de-dollarization dynamic that's taking place. Why denominate your assets in US dollars if Washington can confiscate them when you irritate Washington? It's just in 2025, I think it's a non-starter as a strategic move.
Okay, and do you believe though that this is a move that is going to be contemplated by the European Union? Are they going to look at other such economic measures as well to try and pinch Russia economically at this juncture as well?
Yes, but the challenge is that the two Europe and Russia are too interdependent. Russia needs, by hook or by crook, through the front door or the back door, needs Russian oil and gas. And it's not going to cut that back because the cost, monetary, but also in terms of political support, would simply be too high. They're not going to seize and redeploy these Russian assets. Freezing is one thing. Seizing and redeploying is something else. They're not going to do that because the cost would exceed the benefits, both economically and diplomatically and in terms of the domestic politics at home. I see this, I've been wrong before, and I could be proven wrong here. But if I'm reading the tea leaves, what I say is this is a non-starter. This is Ursula von der Leyen doing what she's prone to do these days, which is, to use a term of art, bloviating.
All right, stay with us. In fact, we're turning now to more news as well coming in. The Belarus Defense Ministry has